Hello class. In the last video, we looked into nature and spirit, as it so happens, Demeter and Persephone, in one domain of ancient Greek religion. This video is going to be a more in-depth discussion of our very concept of nature and its roots in the ancient Greek idea of Physis, as we can discern it in both Greek religion and philosophy more broadly. We can begin this survey with the figure of Orpheus and the cult of Orphism, which was very influential in the Hellenic world, from the earliest documentation, the 7th or 6th century BCE, and through to the Hellenistic period. Here you see an interesting seal cylinder or amulet from the 3rd century AD, which depicts Orpheus on a cross, and which has been a very important document in understanding the influence of Orphism on Christianity in late antiquity. Plato speaks of the texts attributed to Orpheus as a hubbub of books, many of them liturgical, consisting of hymns and cosmologies, and others philosophical, such as the Dreveni fragment papyrus, which is an Orphic work of pre-Socratic philosophy, partially recovered in the 1970s. Most all Orphic texts from an earlier period of archaic and classical antiquity have been lost, but in one of the standard Orphic cosmogonies, which has survived in fragmentary form, there are also others. According to these Orphics, the first and original deities are Chronos Anarche, that is time necessity, or the cosmic egg stretched between chasma or abyss below and ether above. Out of this cosmic egg is born Phanes or Eros, in a way spirit emerging from nature. Phanes is the first ruler of the cosmos, but then he passes the scepter of rule to Night, and then to Uranos and Gaia and Kronos and Rhea, this being where this Orphic cosmogony verges with the Hesiodic one. Finally, the scepter is passed to Zeus, although instead of Hera being as central, Zeus's rule is characterized first by the influence of Rhea and Demeter, and then by the influence of Persephone and Dionysus. Dionysus being the last and final son of Zeus, and thus the king of kings, whose rule is assisted by the first spirit god Phanes, as well as by the Titan goddess Metis, cunning or intelligence. The main tenets of Orphic beliefs that we can discern from the surviving sources include purity of soul through katharmoi, that is purifications, and telete, that is ritual initiations, which bring about a cleansing liberation of our divine nature, that is, of the spirit in nature. Next, according to this doctrine, the body is corrupt and a tomb, soma sema, and there awaits for the Orphic initiate some sort of higher status or blessedness in the afterlife. This seems to have been influential for the Eleusinian doctrine of salvation in the afterlife based on initiation at Eleusis. And it also seems to have influenced early Pythagorean communities, emphasis on the soul that undergoes transmigration and on the other or truer world of number, eventually becoming Plato's true world of the forms. The Orphics also seem to have had a doctrine of original sin of a sort. Human beings are created when the Titans, escaping from Tartarus, play knucklebones, dice games, and other sorts of mirror play with the infant Dionysus. This is a trick, however, and they slay him, consume him. Zeus finds this out and slays the Titans with a thunderbolt, and human beings are made from the ashes of the Titans. But since the Titans had eaten the infant Dionysus, we are made not only from the ashes of the Titans, thus explaining why the body is a prison or tomb, like Tartarus, have within us the spark of starry essence, or the soul attributable to Dionysus. This myth, Dionysus is as well reconstituted and reborn, so is often discussed by Orphics as a twice or even thrice-born deity. The Orphics also believed in the Indian doctrine of the transmigration of the soul, though there is not much that survives of transmigration in the earliest Orphic writings. They are also associated with vegetarianism and the rejection of sacrifice in the Greek polis. The most central religious or spiritual belief of Orphism seems to have been apotheosis, that is a union with the divine spirit. Orphic poetic ritual being designed to bring about a telestic or initiatory henosis, or becoming one, of divinity and humanity through special rites. The discussion of Orphism could be long and fruitful here, but for our purposes it's being introduced mainly because of the very interesting Orphic hymn to Physis, which comes down to us only from sources in the 1st to 2nd century CE. O Physis, resourceful mother of all, celestial and rich divinity, oldest of all, queen, all-taming and indomitable, lustrous ruler, ever-honored mistress of all, highest goddess, imperishable firstborn, fabled glorifier of men, eternal, knowing, light-bringing, irrepressible, swift in the motion of your feet, your steps are noiseless. O pure marshal of the gods, end that has no end, all partake of you, but you alone partake of none. Self-fathered and hence fatherless, lovely, joyous, great and accessible. You nurse flowers, you lovingly commingle and twine, and you lead, rule and bring life and nourishment to all. Self-sufficient, many-named persuasion of the graces, decay or justice herself, queen of heaven and earth and sea. You are bitter to the vulgar and sweet to those who obey you, wise in all, giver of all, nurturing queen of all. Abundant nourishment is yours as you dissolve whatever ripens. Father and mother of all, nurturer and nurse, you bring swift birth, O blessed one, and a wealth of seeds, and the fever of the seasons are yours. An opulent and mighty divinity, you give shape and form to all things, eternal, setting all in motion, skilled and discreet, you are ever turning the swift stream into an unceasing eddy, flowing in all things, circular, ever changing your form, fair-throned, precious, you alone accomplish your designs, and loud roaring, you rule mightily over sceptered kings, fearless, all-taming, destined fate, fire-breathing, you are life everlasting and immortal providence. Since you fashion these things, you are everything. You are the all. For you alone do these things bring peace, health, and growth to all. Wow, what a hymn, and its close analysis might be the subject of an entire video. Just a couple points to underline. By the Orphic period, Physis is being described as nature, both the source of everything and the reality of beings as such as a whole. Still personified as a goddess, her action in the world is nocturnal, knowing and yet light-bringing, irrepressible. Also, there is no need to posit an origin or source for Physis or nature herself. Indeed, not only a resourceful mother, she is self-fathered and hence fatherless. Or far from being transcendent in a world beyond, Physis is accessible. She is associated with other major deities, such as the Graces and Justice, but her blessings are only felt to those who are obedient to her way, never to the vulgar. Lastly, she is opulent and mighty, and also eternal, that is, all capable in setting into motion everything that occurs and all techni, both in nature and in human art, as well as discreet, not exactly completely self-withdrawn, but hiding herself in some way in her work. She is also, sounding a bit proto-Stoic here, fire-breathing, destined fate, and thus eternal, immortal providence, whose ultimate boon, when she is respected, is peace, health, and growth to all. The Orphic hymns are sometimes dismissed by scholars as being of less literary or spiritual value than other hymns in the Greek canon, although I do not see at all the reason for such a judgment when I read the Orphic hymn to Physis. Physis is, in short, the original Greek conception of nature. What exactly this means will take some unpacking. So, in addition to the study of Demeter and other Greek goddesses associated with nature, it should be particularly revealing to unfold the very notion of Physis in Greek religion and philosophy. This was indeed one of Heidegger's favorite topics in his study of the Greeks, and his whole philosophy of being itself, or truth, can in a way be seen as an unfolding of the question of Physis as being. Pierre Hadot has more recently given us a wonderful book on this term Physis, titled The Veil of Isis, an essay on a history of the idea of nature. He begins by noting that all investigation into the core Greek concept of nature, which is not here with Natur cosmos, but rather Physis itself, begins from a surviving fragment of the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. All of Heraclitus' surviving sayings are magnificent, enigmatic, powerful, fascinating, and obscure, but none more so than this one. Physis cryptesthai philai. Most easily translated, nature loves to hide. Heidegger will render it more prolixly: what reveals itself, the self-revealing Physis, loves self-concealing. The Greek is compact to an extreme, and so needs endless retranslations to bridge the gap between us and what Heraclitus might have actually meant. Minimally, nature, Physis, what emerges and disappears in time, with concealing or hiding his friends. Heraclitus' aphorism seems tied up with so many notions: the secret of nature, the goddess of nature, such as Artemis or Isis, who veils or conceals herself. And there is later a famous inscription on the ancient temple of Isis at Sayaz in Egypt, well known to the Greeks and even making its way into a footnote in Kant's Critique of Judgment. The inscription read, "I am all that was, all that is, and all that will be, and no mortal has drawn the veil from before my face," indicating that Isis, or nature, is self-concealing but also reveals herself when and to whom she wishes. This inscription is cited in Kant and in all subsequent German philosophy, and makes its way from there as well into New Age nature religions as they develop from Madame Blavatsky's theosophical book, Isis Unveiled. Hadot notes how for thousands of years, philosophers, theologians, poets, scholars, and magicians have puzzled over Heraclitus' saying. He himself may have written it under the protection of and in the sanctuary of the goddess Artemis on his home island of Ephesus. Everything hinges on how we understand the first word, physis. As Hadot points out, the word physis itself has evolved considerably between Heraclitus' time and our own. What we mean when we say the word nature or physis simply isn't what the archaic or the classical Greeks or later ages meant. Indeed, every age reinvents its own concept of nature and its own private delusion regarding what nature, physis, cosmos really are. It might be fair to say that ever since the emergence to dominance of the nature-culture divide, every conception of nature formulated from the perspective of human culture has been a delusional projection to some extent. But what if nature itself shows itself within, before, and beyond the nature-culture divide as a whole? Might we then be able to recover a sense for what the ancient Greeks meant when they uttered the word physis? According to Hadot, in Heraclitus' time, physis expressed as noun the action in the verb phyisthai, that is, to be born, to increase, to grow, and to result. Physis is both natural and vegetal becoming, the shoot that grows as well as the shoot that has finished growing, phuine. And so the fundamental image expressed in this word in the archaic context is that of a springing forth of things, an appearance or manifestations of things that results from spontaneity. This makes physis sound a bit like the Taoist Ziran. On the history of the word physis, we find it first in Homer's Odyssey in the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, where physis designates the result of growth. How denatured has our modern concept of nature become, given that we seldom think of nature as growing, birth, or birthing? In Homer, physin designates the aspect of a very particular plant, such as the black root out of which emerges the white flower, a herb of life called the malu plant, which Hermes shows to Odysseus so he can overcome the effects of the evil potion of Circe. Speculation as to what the malu or molly plant is massive, and Dale Pendell, a friend of mine before he passed away recently, thinks it is datura, i.e. a shamanic or mind-altering plant that counteracts others. Empedocles and other pre-Socratic philosophers ended up speaking not of physis as growth exactly, but as the very nature of things. And so from physis we also get our obsession in the West with essences, and even the dawn of metaphysics, that is the quest for what things really are in the midst of their becoming, that is growth, birthing, and change. So is physis essence, being, or is it birth, generation? In the 6th to 5th century BCE, the philosopher Parmenides spoke of the physis, birth of the ether. Know the birth of nature and of all the signs that are in ether, and the splendid works of the shining sun and their origin, and the vagabond works of the round-eyed moon and their origin, phusine. In early medical treatises such as Hippocrates, physis corresponds to the physical constitution of the patient, that is, his or her essential nature from birth. And so it is here that Hadot notes an initial separation of physis as essence from the very concept of birth, though still depending on it. It is in Plato and Aristotle that physis with the genitive eventually came to mean what we call a thing's nature or its essence. This becomes the dominant meaning of physis in Greek thought. We might say that here a kind of abstraction set in. Plato sometimes speaks of the physis of the infinite or the physis of the unbounded, which makes no sense if things of Physis are physical and growing. So we must give an account for how the notion of Physis became the notion of nature. What we must first recognize is that our modern concept of nature, meaning beings as such as a whole or the cosmos, was only gradually extracted and absolutized from the Greek term Physis. Much of its usage in literature and poetry, religion, and pre-Socratic philosophy is less proto-scientific than it is reverential and mystical, and resonances of an original relationship to and respect for Physis, as both originating and the originated, continued within new philosophical methods. As Aristotle says, the best method should be, in this field as in others, to see things being born and growing. Also, in Aristotle's physics, we begin to get the notion of nature as an internal telos, or goal-directed orientation. Nature is teleological. Here, nature becomes distinguished from human art, or techne. There are, in Aristotle, the realms of technai onta, fabricated beings, that is, artifacts of human culture, and then there are phusai onta, that is, beings of nature, characterized by entelecheia, having their ends in themselves, and emerging, growing, becoming, changing, achieving their form from within themselves. Now things get pretty complicated here, since Aristotle also spoke of an artfulness in nature, and I am skipping page 21 to 24, which provides a more in-depth account of the usage of the term Physis in Plato and Aristotle. It's just too technical for us here in this class. The most important takeaway so far is 1, the idea that nature has an internal finality, a telos, hence the idea of teleology, or purposiveness in nature, and 2, the idea that nature does not reason but works on itself, that nature is not an art, not a techne. And so Aristotle can say, art is imposed upon matter with violence, whereas nature models matter easily and without effort. Aristotle here sounding a lot like the Taoist concept of Wu Wei. At the same time, however, shouldn't we say that nature is the more perfect art, since it is inside the thing itself and is imminent and immediate in its unfolding? And here we find also in Aristotle the notion of nature as a secret or hidden or deeper art and creativity, and this notion will dominate the entire subsequent history of the philosophy of nature to the Renaissance and beyond. Marsilio Ficino eventually writing in the Florentine Renaissance, "What is human art? A particular nature operating on matter from without. What is nature? An art that gives form to matter from within." This, what we sometimes think as a modern idea of nature as an art within things, innate and instinctive knowledge and unfolding, is actually quite ancient. Relatively, nature as an art within things possesses spiritual intelligence. And thus Epicharmus in the 5th century BC wrote, "All that is alive is intelligent," and this is one of the earliest statements of panpsychism, the idea that everything is ensouled. God and nature do nothing in vain is one important outcome of the Greek philosophy of nature. And nature knows what she's doing is another. Even Immanuel Kant, master of critical reason, will call these principles or maxims of reflective judgment. Later, Hellenistic philosophy inherits these meditations on Physis, the Stoics defining it as an artistic fire that proceeds systematically and methodically to engender all things, here fusing Heraclitus's doctrine of fire with Aristotle's physics. For the Stoics, nature is Janus-faced or two-faced. Nature is the inner being of things, the world soul itself, and also the outer world produced, which is ruled by the supreme god Zeus. In Stoic thought, motion, Physis, nature, God, providence, and divine reason, and the supreme god Zeus all are one. Once the cosmic process is deployed, nature sinks into matter to form and direct bodies and their interactions from within. Hadot next looks to Pliny the Elder in the first centuries of the Common Era as one of the first thinkers in whom Physis has become entirely spiritualized or worldly, cosmos rather than a physical ingrowing nature, the world or that whole which people have been pleased to call by another name, heavens, whose vault covers the life of the entire universe, must be held to be eternal and immense, a divinity. It has not come into being, nor will it ever end. To scrutinize what is outside has little importance for man and escapes the conjectures of the human mind. The world is sacred, eternal, immense. wholly present within all things, or rather, it is the all, infinite while it seems finite, determinate in all things while appearing indeterminate, embracing all things within and without itself. It is both the work of the Physis of things and the Physis of things itself. Here in Pliny, the word Physis, as an event, process, or realization of a thing, has come to mean the invisible power or cosmos or God that realizes this event. And here we encounter a phenomena that historians of religion have analyzed carefully, the passage from the experience of an event to the recognition of a power of force intimately linked to this event. In this case, spirit, cosmos, or God, separated from and directing nature. An idea common to Judeo-Christianity, but otherwise quite foreign to the Greeks. Throughout Hellenistic thought, nature is also personified as a goddess and mother. Thus Pliny also writes, "Hail, nature, mother of all things." And around the 2nd century CE, hymns to nature were widely composed, like the Orphic hymn to Physis read earlier. Mesomene writes of Physis, "Principle and origin of all things ancient, mother of the world, night, darkness, and silence." And the Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius on Physis, "All is fruit in me of what your seasons produce, O Physis. From you, in you, for you are all things." And again in the Orphic hymns, "O nature, mother goddess of all things, mother of innumerable ruses, heavenly, ancient, fecund divinity, queen, who tames all and is never tamed, who governs all and sees all." But within these diverse personifications of nature, she is also seen as cruel. "O cruel nature, why do you then produce what you destroy so quickly?" There is also an intimate link in Greek religion and philosophy between the secrets of the gods and the secrets of nature. From the most archaic times, it was imagined that only the gods had access to the secret inner workings of things. The gods too, however, were born of nature, but in an exceptional sense. Nature is fully known and realized by the gods, a knowledge they hide from humankind. Hermes tells Odysseus regarding the molu plant again, "It is not without effort that mortals can uproot it, but the gods can do everything easily." The Pythagorean philosopher Alcmaeon of Crotona complained already in the 6th to 5th century BCE, "Both in the field of the invisible and in immortal things, the gods have immediate knowledge, but we, by our human condition, are reduced to conjectures." Divine secrets of nature were hidden not only regarding theoretical knowledge, but also regarding everyday life. In Homer, the gods possessed Sophia, know-how, skill, wisdom, all-knowing activity. Because of their Sophia, they are close to Physis, and gods live an easy life, whereas humans have a hard life beset by ignorance and exclusion or exile from the secrets of nature and the gods. In Hesiod, thanks to Prometheus, humans are able to snatch some secrets of the gods home again. And for Plato, the deepest secret of natural processes is inaccessible, like the noumena or inner being of things is inaccessible in Kant. The best we can do is learn to recognize or recollect and understand the forms in nature. Regarding human theories of nature, the Roman philosopher and Stoic Seneca will say, "Are they true? Only the gods know, who possess the science of the true." The idea that nature has secrets which the knowledge, spirit, and wisdom of man must uncover is the literal origin of modern science, and makes a stunning comeback in the scientific revolution over a millennia later. However, this notion of nature having discrete secrets which she keeps is relatively late. We're simply not sure if it's implied in Heraclitus' aphorism. It appears explicitly only in Cicero when he writes, "Things which have been hidden and enveloped by nature herself." The Epicurean Roman poet Lucretius affirms that jealous nature has hidden the spectacle of the atoms from our view. According to Lucretius, in his poem on nature, the philosopher Epicurus had robbed nature of all the veils that conceal her, and that he had forced the tightly closed gates of nature open. Note the Greek chauvinist and prototypically rapey culture implied here in regard to the basic relation of man and nature. The poet Ovid says that Pythagoras has discovered by the eyes of the heart what nature refused to human eyes, and also that the secrets of nature are secrets in various senses. Some of the secrets of nature are invisible aspects, distant or inaccessible on account of their greatness or smallness, and some are concealed in plain view, like the atoms, or occulted in their imminent influence, like a comet that one night reveals itself in the sky. Seneca thus writes, "Many other beings remain unknown to us, or perhaps a still greater wonder, they fill our eyes and escape them. Are they so subtle that the human eye cannot perceive them? Or is their majesty hidden in a retreat too sacred for men? And do they rule their domain from there, that is to say, themselves inaccessible to all except to the mind? How many animals are known to us only since today? How many objects of which our century itself has no idea?" Sentiment that still very much animates the modern scientist. One of the few things that all the philosophers seem to agree on in their understanding of Physis, nature, the Latin natura, is that it is the causes of things we see in the external world and yet remains hidden from us. This unanimity can easily lead science to declare a cheap victory over philosophy. And yet honest sciences still confess that underlying every reasonably compelling causal explanation, what we have found is more mystery. Believing we have come to learn and know one thing, another thing becomes hidden to us. And in this way, Heraclitus still presides over the causal explanations of modern science. The Epicureans liked at this point to say, "What appears makes visible what is hidden." The ancient Greek philosophy of nature is not a world of pure logos and light, but one in which the dark and the hidden are the support of the manifest, much like in the Taoist concept of the Tao itself. Both science and psychology will draw profound consequences here. Experiment inching ever closer towards what is hidden, consciousness inching ever closer towards the unconscious. Nature as God's secret system is a notion first fully formulated for Hadot in the Stoics, for whom the great secret of nature remained the interaction of all causes in the cosmic process and the organic whole, the determining action of the primary cause, or of nature, the creator, the artist, and the producer of the cosmos. Or in Seneca, what that principle is, without which nothing exists, we cannot know. We are surprised at our poor knowledge of the tiny particles of fire in the comets, whereas the greatest thing in the world, God, is hidden from us. Hadot comments, "The great secret of nature is thus nature herself, that is, the invisible reason or force of which the visible world is only an external manifestation." In any case, the metaphor of secrets of nature dominated research and the philosophy of nature for 2 millennia. Middle Ages publishing innumerable treatises on nature's secrets and marvels, likely spurred by a treatise falsely attributed to Aristotle, The Secret of Secrets. Nature was seen as a magical system with each individual being carrying in itself mysterious forces. Mirabilia, Latin for miracles, were strange or extraordinary natural phenomena, and Europe had a passion for them. Modern science invented itself out of this medieval tradition of miracles. Francis Bacon proclaiming that nature unveils her secrets only under the torture of experimentation. Experimental method was invented as a way to reveal the res naturae occultae, the things that are hidden by nature. And fascinatingly, it was not until the 19th century that the idea of a divine builder or demiurge god underlying the secrets of nature revealed by natural philosophy and science was discredited. At this point, science took on the mantle of a relatively secure knowledge of nature's processes, and the mystery, wonder, and being of the world and human beings was left to philosophy and art. These two trajectories for understanding nature as scientific system and as artistic mystery came to loggerheads, especially in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. Despite the great philosophies of nature and German idealism, especially Schelling and Hegel, Nietzsche came to be the greatest inheritor of Western philosophical and spiritual thinking about nature. And predictably, he took his enduring directive always from Heraclitus, nature loves to hide. In Nietzsche's terms, nature, wanting to conceal herself, reveals the essence of her contradictions. Nature, in other words, in Nietzsche, here drawing a favorite image from the Renaissance, is a Sphinx. Nietzsche not only evokes Heraclitus' saying in his fundamental meditations on nature, but also the statue of Isis, here enacting a literary scene reminiscent of Apuleius' The Golden Ass, another fantastic text on initiation into Isis as the goddess of nature. Nietzsche writes, As far as our future, that is, in regards to nature, is concerned, we shall scarcely be found following the footsteps of those young Egyptians who, at night, make temples unsafe, embrace statues, and seek to unveil, discover, and expose to broad daylight absolutely everything that there are good reasons to keep hidden. No, this bad taste, this will to truth at any cost, this adolescent madness in the love of truth, we've had enough of it. For that, we are too experienced, too serious, too joyous, too weather-beaten, too profound. We no longer believe the truth is still the truth if the veils have been taken away from it. We've lived too long to believe that. For us today, it is a question of decency, that one doesn't want to see everything in its nudity, doesn't want to get involved in everything, or to understand everything, or to know everything. Is it true that the good Lord is everywhere? A little girl once asked her mother. For Nietzsche, I find that indecent, a hint to philosophers. We should have more respect for the modesty with which nature hides behind enigmas and colorful uncertainties. Perhaps truth is a woman who has reasons for not wanting her reasons to be seen. Perhaps her name, if we were to speak in Greek, is Baubo. Oh, those Greeks, they knew about living. For this, it is necessary to stop courageously at the surface, at the drapery, at the skin, to worship appearances, to believe in forms, sounds, words, and the entire Olympus of appearances. Those Greeks were superficial, out of profundity. Isn't it precisely in this sense that we are still Greeks, worshippers of forms, sounds, and words, and precisely in this sense artists? According to Hadot, for Nietzsche, the will to truth at all costs, to wish for knowledge for its own sake, and to renounce vital illusions would risk destroying humanity. Man could not survive. He cannot do without his vital illusions and the entire world of myths and values without which he cannot live. The pure truth in Nietzsche becomes a negation of life, the will to truth fundamentally allied to the will to death. And yet, despite this, the will to gaiety and superficiality emanates from a type of knowledge, the knowledge of what the core of things is really like, that is ultimately a will to truth as the basis of our pessimism. The men of the depths in Nietzsche are pessimists. Now, normally when we think of pessimism, we oppose it to optimism, as we oppose nihilism to romanticism. In approaching Nietzsche, we must recognize that his pessimism remains consummately romantic, and also that his nihilism is Dionysian. According to Hadot, the Romantics are famous for their idyls in praise of nature, their pastoral passions, their beautiful naivete. And in some ways, Nietzsche is still a romantic. He is also Dionysian. Romantic and Dionysian may not seem opposed to us, but they were to Nietzsche. The romantic is motivated to romanticize things even when pessimistically or gothically because of an impoverishment of life, while the Dionysian is motivated to bless and sanctify things, to make things whole again from an abundance of life. What the Dionysian does is to create and to destroy even the most sacred things, like nature itself. Whereas the romantic pessimist says no to the world, Nietzsche's Dionysian pessimist says yes to the world in all its splendor and horror, with audacity, lucidity, and enthusiasm. For Nietzsche, in the end, nature is not something to be romanticized, even negatively. Rather, nature is a sphinx that we must learn to honor and exalt. Nietzsche thus rejects his predecessors, the German Romantics. On Schlegel, he who cannot bear the vision of the goddess, let him flee or perish, and on Novalis, he who refuses to raise the goddess's veil is no true disciple. For Novalis and the other Romantics, for example, in Novalis's book, The Novices at Sieyès, and Schlegel's romantic novel, Lucinda, to unveil Isis, still to rediscover one's own self. Even Schiller gets into Nietzsche's crosshairs here. So reality stands unveiled before you alone, and perhaps you yourself are the best part thereof, O beloved images of Sieyès. Yet are you not, in your most unveiled state, highly passionate and dark beings, and always too similar to a love-smitten artist? Instead of attempting to tame the Sphinx like the German Romantics, Nietzsche's commitment is to himself become a Sphinx. And in this way, he remains closer to Goethe and Goethe's poem, "Respect the mystery, let not your eyes give in to lust. Nature, the Sphinx, a monstrous thing, will terrify you with her innumerable breasts." This also accounts for Nietzsche's take on Oedipus as early as the birth of tragedy. The same man who solves the riddle of nature, that Sphinx with a twofold essence, will also break nature's most sacred laws. To say that nature is a Sphinx means that Physis, nature, the Sphinx are both beauty and ferocity, giving rise to wonder and horror within us. And here Nietzsche in part replaces the Promethean attitude of scientific philosophy with an Orphic attitude, emphasizing concealment, riddles, and veils. And accordingly, the truth is only through the non-truth that veils it. In Nietzsche, truth is Isis veiled rather than unveiled. However, Isis veiled is veiled nature. And this implies a paradox, a contradiction, and an obscenity. This is why Nietzsche compares truth to Baubo or Iambe in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, the servant in the house of Metaneira who ventriloquizes her genitals to make the goddess laugh. Truth can be obscene, but it can also be modest. The seeker after knowledge and spirit needs for Nietzsche both obscenity and modesty in order to draw near to veiled nature. Hadot notes how Launi here provides an unusual translation of Nietzsche's saying, "Isn't truth a woman who has good reasons not to let her behind be seen?" Here combining both modesty and obscenity. In any case, human beings have good reason to respect truth's modesty and truth's occasional obscene humor. That is, we must strive to cultivate a balance between superficiality and insight into the depth or abyss. On truth as a hag or crone, Doso in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Nietzsche writes, "I hesitate to admit it, but in the north I loved a little woman, old enough to make you shudder. The name of this old woman was Truth." Humanity, was there ever a more hideous old woman among all old women, unless it was Truth? A question for philosophers. This is a common motif in Germanic and Celtic folklore. The old woman who seduces the hero and turns into a beautiful young bride with a kiss. An exquisite lie indeed, and thus we have art so that the truth may not kill us. For Nietzsche, what spirit and existence are in their nature is a Dionysian mystery. In the final chapter I've given us to read, Hadot looks to the philosophy of nature and the interpretation of Heraclitus' aphorism in Schelling, in post-Nietzschean philosophy, especially Heidegger, Wittgenstein, and Merleau-Ponty. Since we'll be covering Schelling a bit next week, for now I'll just cover Hadot's remarks on Heidegger's Heraclitus interpretation. For Hadot, Heidegger brings Heraclitus' aphorism up to date and identifies Physis with what he calls being, and provides various translations, such as being loves to make itself invisible, availing is an integral part of unveiling, and hiding itself belongs to the predilection of being. In Heidegger's view, we are used to paying attention only to determinate objects, a man, a dog, a star, a table. These are what Heidegger calls beings. Beings interest people only by their qualities, their usefulness, or their finality. They are mere things in relation with other things. It matters little to the man plunged within everyday existence that things are or that they are founded by being. Only beings interest him, but the being of beings remains foreign. When we say the weather is bad, the bad weather is enough for us. This is has no weight. All human behavior makes this antinomy burst forth, that man knows beings but forgets about being. And it is from this basic insight of Heidegger's magnum opus, Being in Time, that later Heidegger begins to look to the Greeks and their thought about being in terms of physis. And here we again raise the very large question, how are we to understand being in relation to nature? Is being just another word for nature or physis? Or is there something which transcends nature or physis, spirit or the god? And how does being relate to that? In his magnum opus, Being in Time, Heidegger discusses the human being as Dasein, or being there, and eschews thinking about Dasein in terms of the soul, the ego, the subject, and even suspends the use of the term spirit. Why does Heidegger suspend and put an interdiction or prohibition against the use of the word spirit? Pretty much because we don't understand it very well, think we know what it means, and don't stop to contemplate what a complicated phenomena the spiritual and spirit really are. For Heidegger, spirit is in fact more deeply considered a phenomena of temporality, time as it is lived, as historicity, and even the history of being itself. According to Heidegger, in Heraclitus' aphorism, being unfolds as nature. We now say spirit or being dispenses itself to us, but in such a way that at the same time it conceals from us its essence. Such is the meaning of the words, the history of being, the history of spirit. What if our whole course had been called Being and Nature instead of Spirit and Nature? I guess it wouldn't seem so catchy a title then, or would it? According to Hadot, the task of living within nature as part of nature and understanding nature as spiritual, as related to being, the Greek physis or aletheia, means living with veils and remembering. And Heidegger, only that which is an opening of disclosure can be a reclosure, and that is why it is not appropriate to transcend the kryptosthai or concealment dimension of physis. Much heavier is the task of leaving to physis in all the purity of its unfolding, the concealing as an integral part of nature. Human beings' place in nature, Heidegger teaches and Hadot summarizes, it is inherent in mankind to forget being. In order to live, we must interest ourselves in beings. Hypnotized by our care for things, we seldom pay attention to the blossoming, the surging forth of things or their physis, their nature, in the etymological sense of the term. To borrow the vocabulary used in Being and Time, man lives habitually in inauthenticity, but he can, seldom and precariously, accede to authenticity and lucidity by confronting the mystery of being. What is so neat in Heidegger, whereas previous philosophers and scholars for the most part speak of unveiling nature and discovering her secrets, here being, which has taken nature's place, is not to be discovered, but is both what makes things appear and what does not itself appear. It, being, is blossoming, an absolute enigma. And in the words of Alain Renaud, here being itself is the Sphinx. Was Heidegger right to interpret Heraclitus' aphorism in this way? According to Hadot, he was certainly right to understand physis in the sense of blossoming, or the action of making things appear. He was also right to recognize in this aphorism Heraclitus' method of trying to grasp the identity of contraries. Hadot does not think, however, that Heraclitus could have conceived of being, enai, as blossoming and making things appear. That is, he did not identify being with physis. It's been a full week, so I'm restraining myself from giving an extensive commentary on the spirit pathway in the syllabus, which involves learning more about spirit and nature in the Chaldean oracles from Hellenistic antiquity and in the religions of Hekate. Suffice to introduce that these sources are among the most fascinating inroads we have into some of the deepest speculations imaginable about spirit and nature in Western religious and philosophical traditions. The Chaldean oracles are the only surviving fragments we have from a larger work attributed to Julian the theorist from around the 1st or 2nd century CE. They were a central religious text for the Neoplatonic tradition in philosophy, especially in regards to the Neoplatonic concept and emphasis on theurgy, that is, a magic that compels the gods to manifestation and is a good and natural magic by definition. The evidence for the worship of the goddess Hekate, the witch goddess or dark goddess of nature we found in the Homeric hymns, is rich but even more scattered. A very interesting connection between all these readings this week is that both the Chaldeans and the Neoplatonists worshipped Hekate as nature or physis and identified these two as the third and most important deity, that is, after the two most spiritual deities, which are the primary and secondary paternal intellects. These are, for the Chaldeans and the Neoplatonists, the three aspects of the divine monad. 1, God itself, perceiving the good itself, where the paternal monad exists. 2, spirit, or the paternal intellect, or new mind, that knows the intelligible, a craftsman of fiery cosmos, for eon, the spirit world, and the duration of eternity, copiously plucking the flower of mind from the strength of the Father, has the power to perceive the paternal intellect. And 3, nature, as a dispenser of life-giving fire, filling up the life-giving womb of Hekate and pouring on the connectors a force of fruitful and very powerful fire. This earliest Chaldean system influencing Neoplatonism thus had an enormous impact on the development of the great chain of being idea in St. Augustine and subsequent Christian theology. The original Neoplatonic form of the great chain of being idea, looking a bit like this: you have the one, or God, the primary paternal monad, you have the new, or mind, the secondary paternal intellect, followed by the world's soul, the very essence of nature, as individuating into the various individual souls, followed by the physical universe at the lowest stage of the chain. Hekate in these traditions is syncretized to Rhea, to Demeter, to Physis, all as various manifestations of the one primal goddess of nature, often appearing in threefold form and associated with animals, magic, and witchcraft. Some of the oracles on Hekate in the Chaldean oracles thus say, the center of Hekate is born in the midst of the fathers. Around the hollow of her right flank or thigh, a great stream of primordially generated soul gushes forth in abundance, totally ensouling light, fire, ether worlds. In the left flank of Hekate exists the source of virtue, which remains entirely within and does not give up its virginity. On the back of this goddess, boundless nature, Physis, is suspended, for her hair appears dazzlingly in shimmering light. Truly Rhea, Hekate, Physis are the source and stream of the blessed intellectual realities, for she, first in power, receives the birth of all these in her inexpressible womb and pours forth this birth on the all as it runs its course through the all. Chaldean oracle also has a fascinating detailed theory on the types of spirits that inhabit the spirit world, which divide into three types: lynges or couriers, messengers; connectors or unifiers, harmonizers; and teletarchs or fiery rulers of souls, masters of the initiation. This primary threefold of spirits, the Chaldean system, will end up greatly influencing Christian angelology in the coming centuries. The lynges kind of being like cherubim angels, the connectors and teletarchs more like various stages of the seraphic order. Nature and spirit in the Chaldean oracles, there are many stunning aphorisms and fragments, such as, do not invoke the self-revealed image of nature, do not gaze at nature, her name is destiny, Hymarmene, or the cosmic influence of the whole of the cosmos, the stars, what we now understand as astrology. Do not defile the pneuma, that is the spirit, nor deepen the surface, which here seems reminiscent of Nietzsche's doctrine on superficiality as essential in our understanding of the depths. There is also in the oracles an emphasis on liturgy: sing a hymn to the Paean, that is Apollo, keep silent, initiate. Hecatean nature, the oracles also associate with the dark and demonic, the ill-tempered dogs who enchant the soul, and the spirit or pneuma they associate with an accompaniment of the ascending soul, the soul never leaving wholly behind the dregs of matter, the soma sema, or body is a prison of the Orphics. Aphrodite, or the goddess of love and sensuality, is primordial matter itself here, and the spirit world is zoned into various realms or stages and is also eternal or unaging. The soul is implicated in matter, which is to say vehicled in matter, and the spirit world itself is defined as an ethereal world, the ensouled material world being an empyrean one. The zones of the ethereal world are staged and reflected as by a mirror in the empyrean one, and we get the word empirical, or the study of nature objectively, from this word empyrean. And time itself, or the eon, the duration of eternity, the linking together of the ethereal or spirit world and the empyrean or ensouled physical one. Throughout these interactions of nature and spirit in the Chaldean oracles, it is the goddess Hekate who possesses the keys. The last reading for this week is much easier going. It's from Soraya Este's book, The Circle for Hekate. Este's Hekate was not an obscure nature goddess in sophisticated cults like the Chaldeans and the Neoplatonists, but was a much more widely worshipped goddess as well. And our last reading for this week tells her fuller story and follows her wanderings across the ancient world. Hekate makes significant appearances throughout the Hellenistic era, often in locations associated with the great Greek philosophers. Her two most interesting appearances are, for our purposes, at Eleusis and in the Chaldean oracles. Amazingly, her worship survived in various forms underground after the rise of Christianity, and mentions of her become increasingly common again after the Renaissance, for example, in Giordano Bruno, in Shakespeare, in Christopher Marlowe, in Oscar Wilde, and many, many others. Lastly, Hekate may even be part of the model in the background for the design of the Statue of Liberty. The torch and the particular type of hat worn by the statue being very much associated with Hekate in the ancient literatures. So Hekate, goddess of nature, may also be in this form a goddess of human freedom and self-development. other than a strictly curtailed part of the Chaldean or Neoplatonic hierarchy. Okay, that was a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed this overview lecture on nature as physis in ancient Greek religion and philosophy, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we'll do another unit on philosophical conceptions of nature and spirit, this time in the German idealists and the American transcendentalists. See you then.